evening and welcome to this third session of the winter study. We are now going to take on homelessness, and I will give us a biblical view before I hand over to the chief speaker, Ian. Before I go on, I would like to especially acknowledge the organizers, especially Ian Foster and his team. And I can't see her, but we also acknowledge Mary Green, who is a trustee of Glasgow and a parishioner at Old Saints, and all the other volunteers. I am grateful to them for inviting me and allowing me to be part of this noble work of the Lord. I am one of the priests at All Saints Fulham. I also appreciate my vicar, the Reverend Penny Seabrook, for allowing me and Father Jonathan to be part of this winter study group. Now to business. The Old Testament taught us in Isaiah 58, verse 7 to be exact, to be of help to the helpless. It says, "Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover in and not to hide yourself from your own flesh." The book of Leviticus added in chapter 25, to be exact, verse 35 and 36, if your brother becomes poor and cannot maintain himself, you shall support him. Take no interest from him or profit, but fear your God, that your brother may live beside you. We are implored to extend a friendly and benevolent hand. We are told that it will cost us when we help, and that we must be prepared to pay the cost. To the economist, it means that we bear the opportunity cost. This, in simple terms, is the loss of the benefit that could have been enjoyed had a given choice not been made. So when we help the homeless, there is a cost. Cost in terms of our time, the time we spend, our substance of money, and our energy. The book of Leviticus, which I referred to, outlines and gives us how and the duty we must perform when we worship. It is a book that gives a guideline for holy living. So I will also repeat that text that I referred to. If your brother becomes poor and cannot maintain himself, what is being said here is that a fellow human being can become poor and unable to sustain himself or herself. That is what we find when we become homeless. You cannot sustain yourself. This is also saying that life is fluid and it can change course at any given time. As human, we are not to close our hearts against anyone that is in need. We must have a personal stake in the welfare of other people. I am sure that the talk about homelessness is going to be a talk about owing less so that we can stake in others. It is a way of living that can only be fed by the ever-flowing spring of love streaming from within us. There's no way you can talk about homelessness. We must be prepared to give something. It is like buying a mortgage. There must be a personal stake. And that personal stake, I believe, is what will be discussed today. So Ian Foster, I'm sure you will throw more light into this. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your introduction and sharing a little bit about, yes, the reason why we're all gathered here today to look at homelessness specifically. I'm going to share my screen as I have a presentation for us. So if you are okay to give me permissions to share my screen. I did have the big green button, but I think you might have to make me a co-host, I think, to be able to do that. And now I've got that ability. So just loading my screen now. Can you all see my presentation on your screens at the moment? I'm getting a few thumbs up. That's excellent. Yeah, it's wonderful to be here with you tonight, and it's not just me. As you've heard, we have Marie, who's a long-standing trustee of Glassdoor, but also one of our volunteer coordinators, and heavily involved in the work that we do, but also within the All Saints Fulham Parish, as well as a volunteer coordinator, but you'll hear a little bit more about what that means later on. I'm also joined by Yasmina, and Yasmina is one of our caseworkers, and she's amongst us. I can't quite see her on my list of faces at the moment, but she will be sharing a little bit about the casework side of what Glassdoor does. And through that, talking a little bit about some of the kind of people that she helps on a daily basis, and the reasons why someone might be experiencing homelessness. But before I press on with telling you kind of more details about our work and homelessness in general, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to you all for the long-standing support that Glassdoor receives from All Saints Fulham. I've heard about the exceptional fundraising you did recently through your Christmas appeal, and we were very touched to be chosen as one of your beneficiaries. And the amount that you raised completely bowled us over, and will go so far to helping people experiencing homelessness find a route out of homelessness and into a more stable future. So thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for all that you have done over the years as well. I was having a little look through some bits and pieces from before my time, and from organising your own youth sleep out to making Glassdoor the beneficiary of carol concerts, evensong services, church fetes, you know, you name it. You guys have done it all for Glassdoor. But obviously there's the financial side of things, but also the volunteering as well. And yeah, we are so grateful to the community within you that have volunteered week in, week out for years, or for, you know, newly joining us on the journey by volunteering at St Mary's Putney and St John's Fulham. You know, we're so grateful to have you as part of the Glassdoor family. So yes, just a huge thank you to kick us off. But in terms of the kind of overview of Glassdoor, I thought what better place to start than our vision. And our vision is of a future when nobody has to sleep on the streets of London. By partnering with local churches to provide life-saving shelter and working with our caseworkers to provide life-changing support, we're committed to helping people off of the street and into a more stable future. We call the people that we help guests. You'll hear that word used quite a lot. And this is because one of our values is to respect the inherent dignity that's within each and every one of us. We want our guests to feel welcomed when they come to Glassdoor. So you won't hear us use words like a service user or client. And in fact, actually, as we go through the presentation, you won't see that many pictures of our guests. And this again is about the respect that we have for individuals and for each and every one of us. When you're perhaps at your lowest moment or in your time of need, would you like a camera in your face kind of documenting that? Perhaps not. So that's one of the things, that's one of the ways in which we display that value. We're also committed to being open to all, no matter anyone's background, race, religion, gender. We really do, open our doors to everyone in their time of need. And this differs a little bit from other services. Other homelessness services may have to be a little bit restrictive about who they can work with based on someone's geographical location. So sometimes they can only help people within their local authority or local area. But one of the ways in which Glassdoor kind of helps to maintain its independence is through having, or by not actively seeking any government or local authority funding that would ever have to cause us to compromise on this. So what that means is that in terms of the funding for the charity, we are so reliant and indebted to the local community, such as yourselves, for kind of raising the funds to be able to have that open access policy and to be able to do what we do. So that's just a couple of the values of Glassdoor and what we try to bring to the lives of people experiencing homelessness. But I thought, kind of, what better way to hear from a few of our guests themselves about kind of some of the ways in which we've touched their lives, but also to hear from volunteers and staff about what Glassdoor means to them. So I have a video here, which hopefully should play with sound, although I'm actually a little bit conscious that it might not. So do give me a thumbs down if it doesn't play with sound. Can you hear anything? Okay, apologies for that. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a second and just go back into my presentation. Have you got me back on screen now? My big face? Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, here we go. Do this.
Again?
Sound now?
Yeah.
I think it's rating though.
Yeah.
I'm not a lovey, I don't know all the terms. You have to.
Okay, and
Should I say more?
that's great.
Inspiration, dignity,
Safety.
community,
Shelter.
warmth, valued,
Passionate.
opportunity,
Kindness.
flexible, future,
Friendship.
Respect.
change.
Glassdoor is special because our doors are open to everyone.
Glassdoor is special because we restore people's dignity.
Glassdoor is special because they give me a support.
Glassdoor is special because we serve good food made with love.
Glassdoor is special because it's a safety net.
those who have nowhere else to go.
Glassdoor is special because it provides a sense of community to the people that come.
Glassdoor is special because it gives people the inspiration to return to employment.
Glassdoor is special because it's opened doors and given me opportunities to move forward.
Glassdoor is special because everybody is treated with respect.
Glassdoor is special for me because they became my family.
Glassdoor have helped me and made me feel valued.
Glassdoor is special because of the kindness it shows everyone.
So Glassdoor is special because they're passionate about working with the homeless and with those struggling with poverty. It's not just a job for them.
Glassdoor is special because it's about loving our fellow human beings.
Glassdoor is special because we welcome everyone.
Glassdoor is special because I find warmth, security, and safety.
Glassdoor is special because they care about people. They care about me.
So, yeah, hopefully that gives you an insight into, yeah, some of the areas that we really try and help people, and how we do that. But before you hear about that in more detail, in terms of the bigger picture of homelessness, now the official statistic is that 10,726 people were sleeping rough in London in the year 2019 to 20. But the true figure we believe to be much higher in terms of the number of people experiencing homelessness in the capital. And the reason for this is that rough sleepers are just the tip of the iceberg in terms of people experiencing homelessness. So the kind of more accurate figure, which I think was reported by Shelter, is that 170,000 people are experiencing homelessness in London alone, 320,000 in the UK. And the reason for this is that so many people aren't picked up in that 10,000 figure. So many people are perhaps crashing with friends, sofa surfing, staying precariously with a member of the family, but without having a home of their own. But also so many people don't get picked up in the 10,000 figure because they're not seen sleeping on the streets. So people that are out of sight down cold, dark alleyways probably won't be picked up in that statistic. People that ride the night bus all night long in a bid to stay warm and dry, again, because they're not actually seen bedding down on the pavement, don't get picked up. So that's one of the reasons, or a few of the reasons, why that figure is actually much higher. And unfortunately, the case is that we expect to see those figures rise as well as a result of the pandemic. Just the other week, it was reported that 70,000 households have been made homeless since the start of the pandemic back in March last year. And you may have heard about the ban on evictions for private rented accommodation. But the reality is that unscrupulous landlords still find a way to evict people. People that are subletting aren't safe from this. But also what it doesn't do is help protect people that perhaps are the victim of domestic abuse or a breakdown in a family relationship, who are having to leave the family home as a result of well, both kind of some of the symptoms of the pandemic, but otherwise as well. Unfortunately, the National Landlords Association reported that 840,000 people or households are in arrears on their rent at the moment. So when that ban comes to an end in a month's time, what will that mean? Unfortunately, we saw 395,000 people made redundant at the tail end of last year. That's just in the last quarter of the year. Unemployment's due to rise. So again, this is something that Yasmina will talk about a little bit more, but you know, employment is so linked to helping people out of homelessness, but also is one of the factors, you know, unemployment for people becoming homeless. So yeah, it's a pretty bleak picture at present, but in kind of a more uplifting sense, kind of what is kind of Glassdoor trying to do about the situation that we're faced with. So as I said at the top of the session, we provide life-saving shelter, and that's something that we at Glassdoor have been doing for over 20 years now. Up until the pandemic, the way in which we've been doing it for many years is by partnering with local churches. So last year we partnered with 34 local churches who effectively take it in turns to be the night shelter. And we have 5 churches doing it on any one night of the week. So that means that effectively, in usual times, we can still open our doors to 170 people every night for a warm, safe space to stay. We do that during the winter months, so November through to March. And last year, overall, we had 829 people stay with us in the Glassdoor night shelters. But Marie will tell you a little bit more about the night shelters very shortly. I think it's also very important at this juncture to just give a quick overview of the other side of what we do, which is to provide the life-changing support through the casework service. So it's all well and good getting a temporary roof over someone's head as part of the night shelters, which are very much designed to be emergency accommodation. But kind of how do you help someone turn their lives around and find that route out of homelessness into a more stable future? Well, that's exactly where the caseworkers come in. We've got a team of 15 caseworkers now who are some of the most dedicated, compassionate individuals that you'll ever meet. And last year they helped 1,324 people through the casework sessions. But yeah, as I say, Yasmina will talk about that a little bit more in a second. But now, as I say, we'll hear a little bit more about the night shelters and also changes to our services from Marie. So over to you, Marie.
Thank you, Ian. A warm welcome to everyone. For those who are a little confused about my surname, I work under my maiden name, and because I actually have to be registered for what the work I do, I'm therefore also work under that for my trustee purposes. But for my life at All Saints, I am Jackson, which is the same as my husband and my children, to take away confusion there. As Ian has mentioned, I am a trustee of Glassdoor and have been for a number of years. At Glassdoor, being a trustee, like everything with Glassdoor, we're a small charity and everyone is expected to play their part. So all trustees have a pretty active role. On average, I spend between 5 and 10 hours a week on Glassdoor activities. And my responsibility is for shelters. And I'm a strong believer, if you're going to do something, you need to understand it. So I spend 1 to 2 evenings a week in our shelters every week over the winter season. And I also every month catch up with all the staff that work in our shelters, both in our office and at our front line. How did I get involved in Glassdoor? Well, About 10 years ago, when our children were both very young, my husband suggested it'd be nice to do something that was just about us, and rather than everything that seemed to be about the children. And coincidentally, that Sunday when I was in All Saints, I was reading the pew notices, and they were asking for people to come and volunteer for Glassdoor. I'm not sure quite if that's what Paul had in mind when he suggested we did something together as a couple, but next week the babysitter was booked, and the rest, they say, is history. I'm going to talk a little bit about our shelters, but I'm actually going to talk about that as also about what it is like to be homeless. So why do we do these things in the shelter, and what does that mean? I regularly get asked to talk at schools, and I ask them when I first go in and stand, usually in the assembly, I ask the children to help empathize with what it's like to be homeless. I think empathy gets us a long way in life. So bear with me a second when I ask you to do the same as I ask to do for them. I normally ask them to shut their eyes, but I won't ask that of you. So what I ask them to do is, first of all, think of everything they ate the day before. I ask them to think of the breakfast that their mums made them eat before they go to school, the school lunch that they grumbled about, the Starbucks that they sneakily picked up on the way home. And then to imagine they'd eaten nothing the day before. There had been no food, no one forcing them to eat a dinner they didn't want, but still actually wanted to eat secretly. The next thing I ask them to do is think of everyone they spoke to the day before. So the mum that forced them to eat that breakfast in the morning, the siblings that annoyed them, their peers that they shared gossip and football scores with, the teachers that they interacted with, and then imagine that they spoke to no one that day. And if they were lucky that day, they got ignored. Because on average, the person homeless in London is 3 to 4 times more likely than anyone else on our London streets, anyone else, to suffer abuse. Ironically, when we usually try to open up a new shelter, the first thing that we find are people complaining about the likely increase in crime. The homeless are not the criminals in most cases. So I asked them to think in a day where no one had shouted at them or no one had thrown something at them. And then I asked them to think about, it's the start of the day. So they had a day that they've spoken to no one and they've eaten nothing. And then I asked them to say, how about you go outside now? You don't do any of your lessons. Sounds quite appealing first thing in the morning if the weather's good. But bear in mind, you've got nowhere to go to get warm, no money to do anything. It actually starts getting pretty bleak, your day. And then I say it starts getting cold and you're really hungry. And now you've got to try and find somewhere safe to sleep. Somewhere where no one will kick you, where no one will set you on fire, where no one will abuse you. And imagine what it's like at the end of that day if you know there's a light to go to. And that's what we do, a warm welcome. And then I ask them to turn around and imagine it's the person next to them. Because homelessness is not something that is chosen for you. Those guests that use us come of all walks of life, all ages. Last year, our youngest guest was 16 and our oldest guest was about 85. And I had an 8-month-old pregnant woman in my shelters. They come from all backgrounds. Some of my guests speak 1 language. Some of my guests speak 6. Some have been multimillionaires in their past, ironically. Some have never had money and lived in the street all their life. And so we treat everyone as equal because everyone really is. And when our volunteers come into the shelters, often like me, they've come running from work after a busy day. Usually I've tried to pick up something in the supermarket to take home for later and things like that. So well, after we have set up in my shelter, we take 15 minutes with a cup of tea. And the reason we do that is for our guests when they come in, coming into a community spirit where everyone's relaxed, the setup is finished, everyone is chatting, makes us guests feel welcome. And it's really important to be welcome. Because for most of our guests, the reason they have come there, the journey that's taken us to Glassdoor is pretty horrific. And therefore, to give them a little bit of help and support is really important. Examples that I can come to, for example, we ask our guests usually sit together at tables and we eat with them. So we share time with them. One of the guests that turned up with me, was a woman. And she was so scared of men so scared from her previous experiences, she couldn't physically even eat in the same room that they were in. And so one of my volunteers would sit beside her each night quietly in a side room, giving her the strength and security to know that she would be safe with Glassdoor. Another of my guests, Nick, was very chaotic when he first joined us. Nick was so chaotic he couldn't find a way to sit at the table with anyone else. And being Nick, it took him a while to get his clothes and his bag off and his coat off and sitting on a seat in the corner. And because he sat in the corner, he wanted soup in a takeaway cup and none of the rest of our meal. But being so chaotic, by the time he was ready for his soup, most of the guests were on to main course. But I knew Nick needed 2 cups of soup because he had nothing else to eat. And I quietly would give Nick a cup of soup, and when he was ready, I would give him the second one. Nick never thanked me, but 6 weeks after he joined Glassdoor, he quietly sat in a corner at one of our tables. The guests are amazing as they're supporting each other and looking after each other. And still Nick just ate his soup, quietly in that corner, sitting beside the rest of the guests. 3 months after Nick had been using our shelters, he came and sought me out. And he said to me, "I want you to know that I wasn't always like this. And thank you for finding the me in me that I didn't know still existed." And that's why we give our guests a warm welcome, because each of them is special to someone. A couple of years ago, each year we do an end of season event, and we talk, and some of our guests come and talk about why they were homeless. And one of our guests, a young man, came and talked about the fact that circumstances had gotten wrong with him. He'd come from Poland to do a job, he'd lost the job, his family had been so proud he'd got this job that he didn't have the heart to tell them he'd lost it. It's a downward spiral. He got thrown out of his flat that Ian's talking about. You lose your job, you have no income, and things went bad. 2 years after he had last spoken to his family. So he then found Glassdoor, and we helped put him back on his feet, found him a job. And eventually 2 years after he'd last spoken to his family, he called them. His family were on a flight 2 hours later. So these guests are not people that aren't loved or aren't cared for. They are just people that for some reason maybe can't be with their family for whatever reason has caught them to be there. So we give them the warm welcome, and we give them a hot meal. Everyone needs food to survive. And some of our guests that come to us have not seen food. I had one gentleman that I put the food down in front of him. He wept quietly and told me it was the first time he'd seen food in 3 days. Many of my volunteers will know, because we give hot drinks to our guests before they come into the shelter, that when they come in, before they come in for the hot and they want the hot drink, the most popular drink is hot chocolate with lots of sugar. And the reason for that, it picks up their energies. And the final thing we give them is somewhere to sleep. And why do we give them somewhere to sleep? Homelessness is really awful about about the impact it has on you. It is really awful about how it makes you feel about your own self-worth. Can you imagine every day rolling up your sleeping bag from having slept in the park and going into work? Most of us, before we go to work, like to have a shower, like to brush our hair, want to clean our teeth. When our guests come into the shelter each night, the most popular thing is the queue for the bathroom. They all want to clean their teeth and be fresh. Dignity is a part of all of us, and they have dignity too. So by giving them somewhere safe to sleep, it allows them to start that slow journey of rebuilding themselves. Some of them from there can immediately start back to work because they have somewhere to come each night, which is dry, which is safe, and it gives them the spot to move forward. And it gives us a place where they can treat us home and where our caseworkers can come to. In normal times, in my shelter, we sleep about 40 a night, but we actually can feed an extra 5 or 10 people. And I regularly have 1 or 2 of my guests from the previous year come and have a meal. And I encourage that because for many of them, it was the first home they've had in many years. And like our children, when they go to university and come back to mum and dad, sometimes our guests need to come back to the place that has been their first home and their first support. So that's where we are. 5 shelters, somewhere warm, somewhere safe, almost 200 guests under our roofs. And then lockdown was announced last year. So the Thursday before lockdown was a normal night for me at the shelter. And you know, my children had both done their, just been come home from school that day, having done their very last day at school before lockdown. And I go to the shelter as usual. And on our shelter on a Thursday night, we serve brownies. And with the brownies, they like squirty cream. Those of my volunteers here will know how much they like the squirty cream. So I nipped in as usual to pick up a can of squirty cream from Waitrose. I have never seen anything like it. There was nothing on the shelves, not just nothing, vaguely empty shelves. I had nothing on the shelves. So I left Waitrose and went up to the Sainsbury's. It's at Fulham Broadway. So, you know, those who are picturing it, it was the same. It was like it was chaos all around me. Nothing, no squirty cream, but absolutely nothing in either of the stores. And I arrive at the shelters, bearing in mind at this point we'd had no government guidance. And I arrive at the shelter, and at the door, our temperatures are already being tested. All our guests and all of us got our temperatures tested. We were sanitized. All our tables were set apart and separate. We weren't eating for our guests. That's how quickly we reacted to the pandemic. And the journey was short, was very quick. So suddenly we had 180 to 200 guests in our shelters, and we were being told that by the weekend we could not any longer operate our shelters. Anyone who knows March and follows March, I follow March because I run shelters, will know March is the coldest month of our year. January and February are often less cold than March. When the temperatures drop to a certain point, we're allowed more guests in our shelters than normal, because normally we're only allowed a certain number of 5, but when it gets cold, we're allowed extra because they're more likely to freeze on the streets. We have the highest number of freeze nights in March of any month of the year on average. And suddenly we were being forced to ask our guests to leave with no plan. Thankfully, by constant petitioning and asking, we managed to get our guests into hotels. I cannot tell you how much effort and work that took our Glassdoor staff. Some of our staff worked 48 hours with no sleep to do that, to achieve that. And on the Monday, we had all our guests in hotels. The Sunday was actually Mother's Day, and instead of spending the day with my children, we spent it lots of time afterwards with them. I spent the whole day calling around places, trying to see if we could secure food, where we could get it, what we could do to help, calling in favors. And actually our last year has been a bit like that. We've received very little government guidance or support. We have spent a lot of time, it feels like always 2 steps forward, 1.5 steps back, pulling together suggested safety manuals, trying to work out how we can support the homeless, trying to influence the agenda, trying to make sure we're doing the right thing by our guests. And so we move now to this season, and a slight change from our usual one. Sorry, Ian, I think it's the next slide on, if you don't mind flipping, thank you. So we had to reimagine what it was going to be like. This is about reimagine, can I just say number 22? I think we reimagined about 8 times over the summer. We spent hours pulling together documents, getting sign off from Health for London, getting sign off from all the local authorities. So we received the news that under no circumstances were we able to run our night shelters. Unfortunately, it was deemed too high a risk. So it was fine for our guests to sleep in the freezing cold streets, but it's not fine for them to sleep at space in our large church halls. So what we have done is identified four very large church halls, and we run a food shelter from each of these each night. So we're providing up to 120 guests each night with food. And then we've hired 2 hostels for this season, for the first season ever. And we have about 100 guests in that. But that means we're offering beds to 100 this year, opposed to 200 last year, which even so for Glassdoor, we know every night those 100 extra people are going out into the street, which is absolutely heartbreaking for us. It's also much more expensive to run the hostels. So we've been amazingly fortunate with many of our long-term supporters of Glassdoor have dug really deep this year. But unfortunately, it's not a sustainable option for the future. In terms of being able to offer as many people at this sort of effective cost that we're doing. So we continue to look and work with the pandemic to think of ways that we can go forward. As yet, most of you may know, but if you don't, those that are homeless are not considered one of the priorities for getting the vaccine. So in terms of enabling them to have a vaccine so they could sleep safely in a shelter, that is yet to be a suggested idea. So we're working with all the options we can to try and provide as many of our guests with safe, secure places. And all through it, our caseworkers have continued to operate as usual, continue to support our guests, be it through our offices, be it in a new venue that we've managed to secure for the coming period, and be it through both our dinner services and our shelters, and sorry, our hostels.
Thank you, Marie. And I think you reminded me of a really good point that I perhaps neglected to mention, which is that while the night shelters traditionally are in those really harsh winter months, the casework service is all year round as well. Yes, we've obviously been working very, very hard throughout the summer with guests to provide casework. I say we, that's the royal we. I can now pass you over to Yasmina, who is one of our caseworkers who has been on the ground throughout the pandemic, to talk to you a little bit more. Yasmina, are you with us?
Yes, sorry, just had to unmute myself, and that should be all right. Can you hear me okay? On my headphone?
Yep.
Perfect. Yes, so my name is Yasmina. I'm one of the caseworkers, obviously, at Glassdoor. Like Marie was saying, I was one of the caseworkers in one of the shelters last year. So I was in the Kensington, Chelsea area. We ran 2 shelters in that area. So I was in one of them. And this year I'm at the Paddington Hostel together with one of my colleagues, Andrew. So a completely different setting. Also, I guess kind of related to what Marie just said, I thought a very surprising figure was that there's only about 400 emergency spaces this winter, and we represent about 25% of them, which is quite an incredible achievement, I guess, of us, definitely, and incredibly needed service. So at the hostel, I casework all of the women who are there, all the female guests, and some of the men. I also used to run the women's group before pandemic, and have been trained in kind of trauma-informed practice and responding to incidents of domestic abuse. So that kind of bring that side to my work as well at the hostel. In terms of why kind of guests become homeless and kind of what leads them to come to our services, there's obviously a number of different factors, and obviously that's kind of different to each individual. But before the pandemic, I feel like we saw a lot more guests who were in employment, but in low wages or receiving low wages. We had a lot of European guests employed, but kind of supporting families back at home, sending a lot of their money to families, and that kind of leading them or leaving them destitute. Had a lot of people relying on rogue landlords, that was previously mentioned as well briefly, so renting rooms illegally without any kind of security of tenancy, often poor, overcrowded conditions. We've also had an increased number, I think last winter especially, recently recognised refugees. So people who'd been in dispersal accommodation outside London, waiting for their status, and once they receive their status have kind of 28 days notice on that accommodation, which obviously isn't enough time to get on universal credit, for example. So people often become homeless as a result. We kind of compared to that, at the moment, I think we see a lot more guests who've lost employment during the pandemic and are struggling because of that. Again, the long waiting periods for benefits are also kind of pose a problem. We have also had a number of people who have recently graduated, so a lot more young people. I feel like at the Paddington Hostel especially, the population overall has been a lot younger than I have seen before, either during the summer or during last winter. And yeah, definitely a lot of people kind of hidden homeless who've been sofa surfing and staying with family and friends, but because of the pandemic have not been able to do that or have lost that accommodation. And we have definitely seen how the pandemic has put a kind of strain on people's relationships. And also in terms of mental health, substance misuse. So when we've had guests where these causes or these reasons have led them to become homeless, are kind of even kind of further negatively impacted by the pandemic as well. So I've definitely seen increased anxiety around health, and again, isolation and the lack of day services open, all have had a significant impact on our guests. Obviously, ultimately, my job as a caseworker is to support people into stable accommodation. So there are often a lot of things that need to happen or need to be considered before that can happen. And those are the things that I support people with kind of day to day. That includes things like identification. That's something that's often lost or stolen when people are rough sleeping. We help people establish a way to pay rent. So we have specialist employment advisor who supports people with accessing work and training. We support people with benefits, like I mentioned before, make sure they know what they're entitled to and how the process works. We support guests open bank accounts, which can be quite difficult when guests don't have identification and they don't have an address. So to get around that, we help people use our address for their post. We try and form partnerships with banks, with branches, to make this easier for our guests. We also obviously need to consider immigration. So we have a lot of European guests, obviously because of Brexit, have needed to apply for their status. So we have specialist caseworkers who can also support with that, make sure that people get their status. And even though we're otherwise not able to provide immigration advice, we can still help guests access that through other services. And we have a partnership with a law centre to make sure that we can help guests find kind of independent and reliable advice, which often people haven't had, or people might have had bad advice, which might have kind of also contributed to their situation negatively. Also, a big part of what we do is making sure that people have access to kind of different services or know about different services that they can access, that they might need. So that would be health related, could be GPs, dentists, mental health support, drug and alcohol support, just to mention a few things, I guess. We, as caseworkers, aim to work as a link between our guests and all these different services to make sure that everyone is on the same page and kind of working together. And that the guest always knows what's happening and kind of who's doing what, which again, can, just making sure that people are kind of feel at the center, basically, of the whole process, that things are just not happening around them, but they're actually actively involved in the whole process. And these are the kind of things that I support people with on a daily basis to kind of prepare them for their tenancies. And then after we've looked at all of these things, we can consider move on and housing options. So it can be quite a long process sometimes. And obviously not all accommodation options are suitable for everybody. So that's also something that we consider, is whether it might be private rented sector or social housing, or whether it might be a hosting scheme or sheltered accommodation. So all of those are things that we're able to support people with. And we also have two other caseworkers, a complex needs one, who supports people who might have multiple different needs. And we have a tenancy sustainment worker who can also continue working with people once we've already housed them, so to make sure that they maintain that housing. And we have had a few people move on at the hostels already, which has been really positive and really nice to see. I've recently had 3 young women moving into their own places, and their most recent one of those was yesterday, which is a really, really nice positive outcome for that lady. So she was a 23-year-old, again, young person, recently left university. She was living with her family, but there was a kind of relationship breakdown with that, and she was asked to leave. And then because of the pandemic, she was unable to find a job, and ended up sofa surfing, self-funding a hostel, just a backpackers hostel. Tried to approach the council, but was told that she wasn't homeless because she was able to find a couch to crash on. So kind of in this very much a limbo situation until she approached a youth centre, who then referred her to us. And she came to our hostel. We supported her into accommodation, where she's now being provided employment support as well. And she started 2 volunteering roles to gain kind of experience and skills and increase her kind of employability. And she's also being supported by solicitors to challenge the council's actions and the decisions that they made. And when she left the hostel yesterday, she was very much more positive, and her whole kind of demeanor had changed during her time at the hostel, which was really, really nice to see. And that's kind of obviously the ultimate aim that we do try and do. So that's I don't know whether that was over time, but that's kind of to give you an idea of what I do and the kind of people that I support. And obviously, if there's any questions afterwards, I'm more than happy to answer any.
Well, yes, thanks, Yasmina. That's a brilliant overview of the casework service and your role and the kind of people that you help. I was encouraged to include a note here about how you can help further if you're inclined. I know that you already do so much for Glassdoor as a community. But we do have a page on our website where if you go to this link here, and it's quite well featured on the Glassdoor website, which is glassdoor.org.uk. There's a top 10 list of other ways to help. That's some hints and tips around having a conversation with somebody that is on the street, because we know what a powerful thing just that human connection, just stopping to have a chat, how valuable that can be, as Marie was telling us. But through to some fundraising ideas, if you wanted to do kind of some online fundraising at this point in time, but through to as well some of the things that we need to help support our services. So we've had communities making face masks, because we do get through a lot, and the guests do like the reusable ones as well. So yeah, there's just a top 10 list of other things that you could do to help. But as I say, and as I said at the beginning of tonight, we're just so grateful for all that you do in so many ways. So I think now you're about to head off into some breakout rooms. I think they've been set up in a way which means that there's a scattering of Glassdoor volunteers in amongst or spread out amongst the breakout rooms. So do feel free to ask them a few questions about what it's like in the night shelters, or if they're involved in the dinner service this year, kind of how things have been a bit different as part of those sessions. But I think I'll hand back over to you, Jonathan, for that wizardry to get those breakout rooms set up.
Yeah, so they're all ready to go, and I'll stick you into them in a minute. If you've got any questions for any of the speakers from this evening that you want to stick in the chat now, then I'll give you, as long as it takes you to peck out on your keyboard, such a thing to do so. And then I'll stick you in the rooms. And while you're in the rooms, do you think about anything that you want to be asking the group, or comments you want to be making, or questions, and particularly have in your mind what effect this might be having on the mission action plan that we're putting together at the moment, that hopefully all these sessions that we're doing will go to inform. So I'll open the room now, and you'll see an invitation on your screen to be part of the room. And as I say, if you've got any questions, stick them in the chat now so that the speakers can be thinking about them while we're discussing.
that seemed very, very seamless.
And I'll pause the recording at this point, and I'll leave Deborah and Ian in this room, and then you can put the world to rights or whatever you'd like to do. I'll head to my room, and then I'll see you back in 10 minutes or so.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I have an invitation to join the room. That's why I'm asking.
I've stuck you in a room, Jasmine. You can if you want to. There's another Christina and Matt Norris are in there who I think are volunteers as well. So if you want to join it, you can. If you find that they're just sort of putting you under the limelight rather than having a discussion amongst themselves, then you can always exit early.
That's fine. All right.
So before any one of you run away, thank you very much for work well done. What I can see with the Glassdoor is that it seems to be like a hub, developing to a hub. So you are taking from people who can put the stake, either the church or corporate bodies or individual, then you now distribute. You distribute to the people. Some stay with you because even when they come to eat, it's part of what you have been able to get from your fundraising that you can give out.
Yes.
Yeah, that was why I was saying that we have to take our time, our substance, or our energy. You have some volunteers that are not being paid, or they are underpaid. They just love to do it. If you were to pay people to do that job, I'm sure Glasgow will have packed up years ago. So that's what I'm saying. So to maintain this hub, we need people to stake something. If it's your money, if it's your brain, something that will keep it moving.
Yeah.
So thank you for the work you've done. It's easy to just go on the website. Even to prepare a website is no joke. It takes expertise, it takes money.
Yeah.
You have to be creative.
Yeah.
Because
No,
if
you're
your
right.
website is not interesting, people will just move to another charity.
That's it. I mean, it's such a brilliant opportunity for us. We're always so keen just to have conversations with people, and we absolutely leap at any chance to talk to people about the work that we do. And that's why I was delighted when the message landed in my inbox from Reverend Penny, inviting us to join you tonight, because I think, as we were talking about, human connection is everything, isn't it? And the way in which Marie spoke and was able to kind of really paint a picture of what it's like for somebody experiencing homelessness that is turning to Glassdoor. You don't get that necessarily with the written word. I was reflecting, and I'm sure many others were, as she was talking about how fortunate we are, but also how kind of unfortunate others are in that position.
It's not easy, because if you think of the pandemic, with everything happening outside, even for me to take the bus or for me to walk on the street, sometimes I have to cross the road. So you can imagine somebody working in Glassdoor, people you've never known before, just come in, you don't know how they've exposed themselves, and you still have to deal with them.
Yeah.
So I think it's a miracle that you still have people working there, because the virus out now, from what we heard, you don't have to show the symptoms.
Yeah.
So for some people to leave their house every day, or to go to work and sleep overnight with people that have no places to sleep, I think we need to step up our prayers so that you can have enough energy to do the work.
Yeah.
How long have you been working with Glassdoor, or have you done something similar before?
So I've been with them for about 18 months now. So a relative spring chicken compared to some of our other employees. But yeah, I think just thinking about what you were saying around people that are still so dedicated, we last year, I should have mentioned this, but last year we had 1,600 volunteers with Glassdoor throughout the year. So obviously sorry, not last year, the year before the pandemic. So 1,600, which is an incredible amount of people, but so many people wanted to get back involved, even, during the pandemic, and do what they could. Because of the way in which we changed our services, we don't actually have as many volunteering opportunities. But out of the 34 churches that we work with to do the night shelters, I think 32 of them are still supplying volunteer teams to help with the dinner service. So yeah, really there was no question from so many, including All Saints, to be involved at this difficult time. So yeah, we're very grateful.
How do you do the night shelter? The churches have some buildings which people, or it's just a big room, or?
Yeah, so the reality is we often use the church hall building, and that does mean that we have around 30 men bedding down in that environment, so it's a shared space. We always make sure that there's a separate space for women, as Marie was saying about the guest, with eating around men. Obviously, safety, etc. It's so important to have separate sleeping spaces for women. But yeah, it's not. We do stop short of calling it accommodation, because it is very simple. It's a sleeping bag and a sleeping mat on the floor, but it is that safe, warm, dry space where guests have also had access to toilets, food, etc., where someone can stay overnight and then begin to think about kind of plotting their own route out of the situation that they're in.
Yeah. You mentioned something the other time. I just want to encourage you not to think that way. You said you've only worked for 18 months.
Yeah.
That some people have been there for years.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to remember that story, I think, given by Jesus in the Bible. Some laborers, because we are all laborers, some started work at 6 a.m., some at 9, some 1 hour to 6.
Yeah.
They received the same. So whether you've been there for 40 years, it doesn't matter. The fact that you are in that work, you are doing it, I think that should, don't be bothered. People can be there for 80 years, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And that is the irony of the kingdom of God. How long doesn't matter, is perseverance. So God will just strengthen you, because like from what I read, nobody is outside the catchment area of homelessness. Nobody.
Yes. So our chair of trustees, Reverend Brian Lethard, who's at St Luke's in Christchurch in Chelsea, he talks about the kind of gossamer thin line between having a roof over your head and not, and just how close so many of us are to that line. It's kind of shocking that in 21st century, that it is the case, but it is, isn't it?
If you recollect what happened, I think it was in Italy about 4 or 5 months ago, when there was a blast in a warehouse and about a quarter of the city were involved. Was it in Italy? It was in Europe, but Lebanon, somewhere. There was a blast. Yeah. A lot of people will become homeless.
Yeah.
People that are extremely rich. Because when you live near the wharf, you must be rich. There are some areas you must have money. So that's why I said, no, we are all in the catchment area of homelessness. So it is only the grace of God. So the moment we are not actually there, we should just try what we can do to of work. Glass work has done. I thought you just provide dinner, chicken and chips.
Yeah.
Hello? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, we're back.
We are coming back, yeah, and people will be back over the next minute, Debo. And then we've got 15 minutes up until 5 to 9 or so if you want to share questions.
I think, Jonathan, we've got 22 out of the 23, and I think you and I know who might have dropped off.
Indeed, yeah.
So I think we're all here, actually.
Over to you then, Debo, to run matters for the next 15 minutes.
Yeah, I don't have the questions here. So I will just call people who put up their hands. But something I would want to note is that from the discussion, what I could recollect is that we are all within the catchment area of homelessness. Nobody is out of it. So we must have that behind in our thought, so that if you are not homeless now, do what you can to help those who are homeless. There was a blast about 4 or 5 months ago, I believe in Lebanon. Thousands of people were rendered homeless. I hope we will not have any blast here.
Yeah. I think the average person in Britain is 2 pay packets away from homeless. And I think probably if you look at the sort of demographics of All Saints Church, we're very fortunate because if something goes wrong, we've got a lot of different ways that we can sort of survive beyond that, from our own resources, our friends' resources, our family resources. But many people aren't that fortunate. I think, Ian, I spotted a question someone was asking whether the homeless could vote. I think theoretically they're an eligible voter, but I think practically, because you need an address to vote, it makes it particularly hard for someone that's homeless. We were talking in our chat room about the voice of the homeless and the fact that actually often we have to be their voice because they aren't a very powerful voice in themselves, sadly, because of the nature of who they are. And that is one of the areas like voting, for example, because many of them can't register because they haven't got an address.
Yes, I always think about the 3 A's when I think of casework, which is advice, assistance, and advocacy. And advocacy being such a huge thing. So I know the address thing is such an issue for so many areas in which we support people. So I think Yasmina mentioned around registering for a bank account, registering for GP, library. A lot of our guests want to access the library, can't do that now without an address. So we do have a dedicated postal address that guests can use to get their mail coming in, and then use that to register for other services. But actually, Yasmina, you might be able to answer the voting question directly. And how we work around that.
Yeah, so I'm exactly what you said. Like, I'm under the impression that by using a postal address, you can register to vote. So obviously that would require you to, take the initiative to approach services to request for that to happen. But as I understand, that is doable, and we can use our address again for that as well.
Fiona, I saw that you posted something. Sorry, the questions are coming up and then disappearing. I can't seem to see them. Your group were asking some things about vaccines.
Yes, we were just asking, we were all horrified that, with so many vulnerabilities, diabetes and, things like that they're not being prioritised. Is this something that Glassdoor is running a campaign about to put pressure on? And if so, one doesn't want, as it were, speak out of turn if you're concentrating on something else, but is that something that you want us all to write stroppy letters to people about?
So I think one of the things one of the things that we've seen actually, just on this note, it's not directly answering your question, which I might get to in a second, which is actually there's quite a lot of inconsistency across the boroughs. So while it's, I think, the category 2 in terms of priority, a lot of boroughs, or some boroughs certainly, are taking the initiative to prioritise people experiencing homelessness. So I can't remember which ones from the ones that we're based in are doing that off the top of my head, but it is happening. But you're right in terms of, actually, it's all well and good saying kind of some are doing it, some aren't doing it. Yeah, is there something there? And I do know that we have been proactive with letters to MPs around other issues in recent times, such as ensuring vaccinations for frontline workers and others. So yeah, it'd be interesting for me to pick that up and take that away, actually, to a dedicated internal advocacy lead that we have at Glassdoor.
We have had quite a few discussions around this at trustee level. I mean, there is 2 or 3 things. So we've had to fight quite a lot of battles this year. So it's getting the right level of where that battle is. Coming back to that voting, the vaccine's a very similar thing. If you look at the demographic of the homeless, then the demographic of the homeless are such that again, it's quite difficult to actually reach them, to give them vaccines. And one of the things we've made a decision of as a group of trustees, that one of our 2 hostels, we're going to extend the life of it. So it should be closing in April, both of them, but we're actually going to keep it on until at least the end of May. And one of the purposes of that is it would give us a place that if we get into sort of second level of vaccines and guests are able to access them, then actually being our hostel would provide a route by where maybe some of our guests would be able to, and other homeless. So actually to provide some places where homeless would feel comfortable to come and get the vaccine, because it's actually also that logistics is really important. And there's not a lot about that out there at the moment. Someone put something about refugees. I don't know who it was, but if they would like to ask the question directly, we'd be very happy to answer some information on what we're doing with refugees.
I have a terrible habit of thinking out loud, but I was interested that you said that some of them, that some of the people have been released from refugee centres and are stuck in a place where they can't get access to universal credit. Now, obviously, you're picking them up slightly further down the line when they've got into trouble. But I'm just wondering, we are thinking as a church how best we can support refugees who end up in this area. And I'm just wondering, do you have a need for volunteers who could help with the life skills that, people might be lacking in, the reading and the writing and the English?
So the answer is probably yes. Normally, it's much harder at the moment with COVID. So when our offices are able to operate in full capacity, we have a couple of caseworkers in particular that specialise in refugee matters. So we do offer quite a lot of support to guests like that. We are still we do offer food. So what we call individuals, what we call no recourse to public funds. So they actually have no money. And so we have, for example, the Hammersmith and Fulham, so our shelter, we have been providing food, for example, to one refugee family in the area. So they come each night and get the husband comes and collects for the wife, the children, and him a hot meal, and we make the meal up for them. So we do, even if they're not homeless because they may have been given somewhere to live, we are making sure they're being fed if they come to us as well.
I'm just looking at Robert, who I know is on that refugee group, and Christina and others, but perhaps it's a strand of thinking that you could put your mind to.
We could connect in with the relevant caseworker is probably the right way.
I think that would be helpful for us, and possibly for you, but for us.
One of the things in terms of translation and language skills that we do need quite regularly is around translating documents. if you imagine up in the hostels, we have lots of notices quite often about social distancing, etc. But they do all need to be translated into different languages. Some are easier than others, and we are blessed with language skills for quite a lot of the kind of European languages. So the more commonly spoken, perhaps kind of German, French, etc., Spanish. But there are certainly definitely needs around kind of Romanian, Hungarian. Yasmina might be able to help me pick out a couple of others that from the vast diversity of nationalities of people that come to us. Some of the kind of more common
yeah,
ones that we need help
absolutely.
with.
I think Romanian and Polish, maybe out of Eastern European languages. Russian always, because a lot of Eastern Europeans will speak Russian as a second language.
We were short of Farsi speakers as well. That was something that we were looking for.
Yeah, always. I mean, Amharic, Tigrinya, always. Also, that's more rarer, I guess. Languages don't have many speakers.
Help with languages if need be. Polish, Romanian. I work with a lot of international teams, so if need be, please shout.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Christina.
Can we pick up, could somebody pick up Claire Shirley's question? What's your view on giving money to homeless people who are begging? Actually, I'm going to expand that a little bit more, because we had somebody in the churchyard sleeping on a bench over the past month, and it caused a lot of people a lot of distress. What should we have done in that situation?
So I'll start another one from everyone's got personal viewpoint. Some views are that you should give to the charities and let the charities manage it, because therefore it's probably more directed and guaranteed. But it's the same way about everyone as an individual, which I came back to, and giving them the right to choose how they spend their money. It is something that maybe, what is no different than us. I regularly give people food and drink on the street. So if I see someone that is and someone that's sleeping rough, then they absolutely are homeless. So I guess people are nervous that they're giving to someone that's pretending to be homeless as opposed to being homeless. Those that pretend to be homeless don't wish the hot drink. Those that are homeless absolutely do. So therefore you've kind of just do it. Try and I tend to like Pret because they give a lot to the homeless. So I go and buy the hot drink, and I think then I've kind of done a double dip of giving them the hot drink and I give it to the homeless. If you see someone on the streets later at night and they're definitely settling down to sleep, it's if you giving them money will enable them to make life choices that might be really important to them. In terms of someone that you find homeless, I don't know, Ian, you want to put the specific, but you basically there's a contact that you should make, and they will come and verify someone. So it's I forget the street link.
Street link, yeah.
So you should contact StreetLink directly for anyone that you see that's homeless. They will come and verify the individual and find out their cause and see if they can do anything to support. And things like StreetLink will send them in the route of Glassdoor, for example. So StreetLink's always a good port of call. And then absolutely, they will be hungry and thirsty. So feel free to support that.
I don't know how much you know about StreetLink, but once we've, we did notify them several times, and we sort of encouraged several people to do it. And I know that they picked him up a couple of times, but what I don't know is whether they follow through, whether they're only an emergency response, or whether, having identified somebody, whether they will keep an eye and perhaps attempt to make contact again. Does anybody know that? No.
I think that completely depends on the person. So obviously StreetLink is a kind of umbrella body that directs your query to the correct local authority where you're based or where that person is rough sleeping. And then that team will have a list or kind of people in that area who are rough sleeping, and they will go out in shifts and try to find those people. obviously the problem with that is that when you do the referral, it's not necessarily on the same night or the night after or the night after that they will come out. So sometimes it can take, I think they say on the referral that it might take, what is it between maybe 2, 3, 4 days even for them to come out or send a team to come out. So, you know, if that person is no longer a couple of days later sleeping in that same place at the same time that you've reported, it might not, you know, they might not locate that person. But definitely once they have located that person, they can, I guess, look at what support that person needs, how much they can provide. And sometimes that support then is ongoing, and they can arrange to kind of see that person more than once if they need to, definitely.
And the other thing is we do have Glassdoor cards. So if anyone wishes any, those Glassdoor cards have our number, and also where we have shelters running. So it provides ways by which the individual can connect in with us. So they can call our office line, and we can provide direct support and help and support them. And we can get them, if we feel we can put them on the list for this year, we can put them on the list for the hostels. They are full, or at least in the interim offer them food via our food shelter and direct access to our caseworker team. So we do that regularly with people, and I've had people come quite far. I've given some to young girls in the city, and they've walked all the way to my shelter in the evening. So it is worthwhile doing.
Yeah, that's a really good point about those information leaflets or cards. Just my kind of final 2 pennies on the giving money to somebody on the street is it brings to mind a story or some words from one of our night shelter managers who was actually homeless himself about 15 years ago. And he says when he was on the streets, what was nice is if someone stopped to give him some money. What was better than that, though, was if someone stopped to give him some food. But what was better than those 2 things and then some was if they stopped to have a chat. And we do really, emphasize just, I know we have done already tonight, but yeah, the power of that human connection and showing dignity and being welcoming and just having a conversation, one human being to another, can be such a important thing for somebody.
Something that stupid, and probably lots of you think, why would I even mention it? But I always, when I bring the coffee back to the guest, well, they're not a guest at that point, they're on our streets, but to the homeless individual that I'm bringing it to, I always crouch down beside them because I'm then their level rather than seeming that I'm more superior and hanging over them. So I actually go to their level. I think it's really important to bring us to same eye contact.
And on that webpage that I mentioned, that top 10 ways to make a difference, number 1 is make a human connection. And it talks there some tips around making eye contact, smiling, even if you're wearing a mask, because you can still see a smile in the eyes. Say hello, ask how they are, and if they would like help connecting to local services. And that's where the recommendation for StreetLink or Glassdoor casework service or the services that we have available can come in as well.
I don't want to bag all the conversation, but just wonder if you, Mari, if you have any idea how many at All Saints are still on the volunteering rotas?
A lot. So
I know initially we had
yeah, I know. So we've got a lot. So even this year we have in effect, because we were doing, someone's doing vegetarian 1, 2, 3, 6. In effect, we have 10 people, and so we have 50 volunteers at the moment. I'd say at least 50% of them are All Saints members, and that's this year. So some people have this year not volunteered for various reasons, but if it's not necessarily serving, I have a lot that are cooking or making things from home. So we have a significant support from All Saints and continue to have through this period.
And we're so fortunate as well. We saw that just across the entire church network that we have the pleasure of working with. I think around 32 out of the 34 churches that would usually be a venue all put forward volunteer teams as they have done in previous years. But yeah, unfortunately, there are fewer opportunities to be involved this year. So we haven't quite seen the dizzying heights of 1,600 volunteers that we saw back into 2019, which is just exceptional.
Can you bring us to an end, Debo?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm sure we all enjoyed this, and I hope we will enjoy playing a more dominant role with Glassdoor and other establishment that works to make life better for the less privileged. I'm very grateful to Porter, Mary Jackson Green, and our caseworker, Jasmina. They've given us a very comprehensive, I will call it report, or rather an holistic view of what Glassdoor has been doing. And I'm sure that most of us, we move to a higher gear and see that we do more things to help the less able people, the less privileged people, those who are now laden with poverty or are unfortunate. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. I hope you will turn up like this next week. Tell your friend that something special is happening with All Saints. Let us start from here. Little drops of water makes the River Thames. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
everybody.
Thank you to Jonathan too.